where your kind of echelon falls for your price tier when you're looking at breeding or showing. Other questions? Yes? What made me decide to get an Akita? When I was about 5, we went over to my aunt's house, and this was an aunt on kind of the cousin side of the family that we didn't see very often, and she had a beautiful Akita. He was about half grown, named Jingo, and he was a brindle also, but a little bit more wildly brindled. He looked like a tiger. He had big reddish stripes and black stripes on one side. The other side, he almost looked like a leopard because the brindling broke up and more into spots. And he was a very poorly socialized Akita, meaning if you pulled up in the car and got out before the owners put him in a kennel or in the horse trailer to lock him up, he would eat you. And there's not a lot. He was also very, very large, so we pull in at this point in an old Crown Victoria, big boat car, pull in, and here comes the dog trotting along, and his head is even with ours while we're sitting in the car. And as a 5-year-old, I was absolutely fascinated by this. I'm an Iowa farm kid. We grew up raising horses and beef cattle, so the size of the dog, just, to me, that was awesome, because he was like a pony. And he's snarling away like Cujo at the window, and we're sitting there honking till my aunt and uncle come out and put the dog away. And they're like, yeah, the only ones he listens to, because he had bonded to my aunt and uncle, and he was mostly okay with their son. But through visiting their house a couple times, I bonded with this animal, and he would sound absolutely ferocious, like he was going to tear me limb from limb, because he'd growl and make noises and play, but we would wrestle in the yard. And I absolutely fell in love with the Akita breed. From that point forward, they're a lot different than other dog breeds, not just in their bearing and their manner, but also different than some canines. They have an additional vertebrae in their neck that allows them to be jointed more. They can hook their paws around things more like a cat. So if one chases you down to tackle you, they'll usually body wrap around you while biting on you to drop you to the ground. And it's really fun to wrestle with one that way when you know they're not actually going to, eat you. But I fell absolutely in love with him. And like I said, no one else could come. My mom and dad would be like, all right, we have to go. And the dog would just sit there and growl at him like, you can't take her. And I knew that eventually when I grew up, it was the direction I was going to go. It took a little bit of convincing for Dan. He's like, well, maybe we could get a Husky or, a German Shepherd. And I'm like, Akita. He's like, all right, fine. And so we got her. She was about 6 months old, and I had warned him about the whole vertebrae thing and how bendy they were. Because one of the other things that does, with most dog breeds, if you have a dog that gets, especially a puppy while you're working with training, that gets a little bit out of control and a little bit nippy, you can grab the back of their neck and kind of pin them where they can't reach your arm. I get a panicked phone call because I was in town getting groceries, and he was at home wrestling with her, and she'd gotten a little bit too wound up, and he grabbed the back of her neck, and she reached around almost like, the head pivoting in The Exorcist, and chomped onto his arm, and they just kind of froze there in stalemate, because I think honestly she'd gotten kind of stuck once she bit onto his arm, but he was afraid to let go because he didn't know if she continued chewing, and he thought he broke the dog. I get this panic phone call, I broke the dog! I'm like, you grabbed her by the back of the neck, didn't you? He's like, her head's swimming clear around, is she possessed? I'm like, no, she's just an Akita. Now, as far as training and stuff goes, in your normal discipline where Akitas respond best to dominance training. Those of you unfamiliar with that, that is where you're working with the animal's natural pack instinct to discipline them. If they get out of line, you grab them by the neck and push them to the ground. If they get really out of line, you further submit them. That's a basic submittal. If they're still growling at you when you've just pushed them to the ground, meaning they have not given in to you saying no, kind of like your teenager when you said no, continuing to scream and rail back at you, For a dog, at that point, what you do is you flip them upside down. That puts them in a vulnerable position that they can't fight back out of easily. And you wait at that point until they relax. Essentially, they will break eye contact and stop kicking with their back legs and relax their body. A full submittal is over and upside down. And you notice broken eye contact, relaxed body position. And he's like, you're making me do this in front of lots of people. This is a really, really vulnerable position, like I said, and it takes a lot of training to get a dominant
Nana's like, what are you doing?
Especially an intact male. To do this in front of a couple hundred strangers,
like,
because what he's doing right now is trusting me, and that I'm telling him it is okay. You guys aren't going to attack me. He doesn't need to stand guard. And he's relaxing and recognizing me essentially as the head of his pack, and that he's going to follow my lead. Other questions?